this panel about how to talk about race in the classroom, because so many of us as educators are struggling under the current and proposed oppressive laws about how do we even do this in the classroom now. So just for context, since January of 2021, over 35 states have introduced 137 bills seeking to limit what teachers can teach and how they can teach it, especially in regards to race, American history, how we teach about politics, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So just to give a few, many of us are familiar with the Florida Anti-Woke Act of 2022, which really sought to limit how race can be taught in classrooms in Florida. And that culminated with the reaction that Florida had to the AP African American Studies course there, which they blocked. Some other laws that have come down the pipeline in Tennessee, educators have to take pictures of their classroom libraries and post them where parents can see them and react to them. And that's elsewhere as well, including Oklahoma. In Virginia, the governor has set up a hotline that parents and community members can call to report teachers who are breaking law about how to talk about race in the classroom. In New Hampshire, there's a $500 bounty that's offered to any parent or community member who can catch a teacher breaking the law, talking about race in the classroom. And in South Carolina, there is a proposed law that prohibits teachers from discussing any topic that creates discomfort, guilt, or anguish. So it's in the middle of this that we're starting to have a conversation about what can teachers do. We know we don't live in a comfortable world and we don't come from a comfortable history. Not talking about it doesn't serve anyone. We have to teach students and model for them how to talk about discomfort and how to build empathy and engage with one another so that they can start to envision a healed world and a different world. So for all of you teachers who are here today with us and who are listening, we want you to know that we see you as frontline human rights defenders. We see that you are speaking truth to power by teaching about race, by talking about these topics that are hard to talk about, by seeking to engage students in the truth. And we want to say that we see you, we hear you, and we thank you, and we want to empower you even more through this panel. So panelists, thank you for being here today. I'm going to start with Guadalupe Cardona, who is one of our lead educators. If you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, and then tell us about what are some ways that you would recommend to other educators who want to know how do we actually talk about race in the classroom today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Guadalupe Carrasco Cardona, and I'm a teacher in the Los Angeles Unified School District. I teach in downtown Los Angeles at the Roy Ball Learning Center. I'm also a proud active member in my teachers' unions from my local United Teachers Los Angeles, led by Cecily Meyer Cruz, California Teachers Association, and the National Education Association, among others. And I teach ethnic studies. I teach ethnic studies here at a school that supports the teaching of ethnic studies, so I'm very blessed. And when I go to other states and I travel and I meet educators in other states and even educators in other districts in the state of California, it's heartbreaking. Honestly, it's heartbreaking to hear that they are in schools that would prefer teachers to, quite honestly, teach lies. Right? Because if you don't teach about race and racism, you are teaching lies to prevent students from having the opportunity to be able to explore their own racialized selves. And so, this is a very important topic. And so I would say that one of the things that teachers can do is to first begin with themselves, right? We have to be comfortable with talking about race. And we have to be comfortable with our own selves, right? And so I would say that teachers need to go on to that exploration first. So either, they can themselves take ethnic studies courses. They can take, like a Black studies course or any of the the ethnic studies, Chicano Latino studies, American Indian studies, or Asian American Pacific Islander studies, and learn about, the experiences of people of color in this nation, but then also explore it from their own perspective, right? Because once you have that strong sort of like centered understanding of race, everything from, whether you come from like some level of privilege, or if you come from a history of ancestors who have been marginalized, oppressed, dehumanized in this nation, to also come to terms with that and what that looks like today, so that when you come into your classroom, you are able to sort of kind of model that for your students, right? And understand what your students are going through. And then I would say the other thing too is that, exploring these topics can be uncomfortable, right? They can cause some anguish. They can cause, not necessarily guilt per se, but it can be uncomfortable, but everything that is worth exploring, everything that is worth developing is going to be uncomfortable. And I would say that it's okay for it to be uncomfortable. We just have to be respectful and humanizing, and then, set up a classroom environment that pedagogically allows that to be safe to do for the students in the classroom. Thank you.
To create a safe space within the classroom, what are some ways that you do that, or that you encourage your teachers at your school to do that?
So I always start, like when I get a new group of students, I always spend the first few weeks really developing that kind of relationship with students, right? So I bring in philosophies like Ashe, like Inlakesh, right? Like Ubuntu, and really explore what they mean with our students. And also, do a lot of activities, cultural energizers, right? Getting students active and moving. I think when you get students moving and out of their seats, it kind of helps them to feel a little bit more comfortable. I think a lot of times we get very comfortable in our little shells. So I spend my first weeks doing that, right? And then I model it, how I respect them, right? I know that a lot of times we talk about respect needs to be earned, but I'm like, just by the fact that you were born and you're a human on this earth, I respect you. Right. And then, I know that outside of this classroom, it's not a perfect world, but in this room, we're going to model something that we can imagine in this world, something better, a better place in this world. And so I do a lot of time, I spend a lot of time really working on that. And then it helps me so that when we get to the kind of more difficult topics, that students can understand, okay, we're going to deal with this respectfully, even when we disagree on things, right? Like we can disagree, but we have to be able to engage it in a way that doesn't dehumanize anyone in the classroom.
Go to you next. If you would just tell us a little bit about you, and then we're going to give the same question to you. So how do you encourage at your school teachers to teach about race in the classroom? And then why do you see that as something that's important or necessary to do?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ndindi Kitonga, and I'm actually really excited to be here and part of this conversation. And with a group of people who want to have this conversation. I think that's really important. And so I started out in public school system, kind of where Lupe is in Los Angeles. But over the past 10 years, started my own kind of independent school with my partner. And really the impetus for that was so that we could have more democratic, more humanizing, more connected conversations with young people. And that's just really what we've been going for. So we're called Angeles Workshop School, and I'm a science teacher by training. So I think this question around advice for educators, the question of race, I think the first thing maybe is to really recognize that the current systems that we have make it so that educators don't feel prepared, that people feel insecure, not ready to talk about race, and that you don't need to have all of the answers, nor do you need to approach curriculum in this very linear way. Like, we're going to start from the root of Africa, and I'm going to make sure you know every single fact about everything slavery on. Because I think what Lupe is saying is very important. It's not just about the content and the history and the curriculum. It's also about the pedagogy and humanizing classrooms where people can be together, ask questions. And so for us, from an ethnic studies, a very liberated ethnic studies lens and a humanizing lens, that means that we don't have to have top-down curriculum. It means that young people and everyone involved in the room, you know, is someone who has cultural wealth and knowledge that they can bring to the space. It also means that once, you know, we have these relationships formed, we can start having very challenging kind of conversations. And I think another kind of aspect of this, that, you know, if you're not part of targeted or marginalized or oppressed groups, is really understanding that there's some real psychic components to racism, which is, it's a system of domination, of course, and there's structural components to it, right? But there's also the deep spiritual and psychic components to it. So for instance, I finished watching Descendant this morning because I could only watch it in a few bits. And it was very interesting how that video, whenever it panned over to the descendants of the Cotilda, you could just see, you know, I think a lot of the white folks in there were just kind of having more of a business way of talking about what needs to be done. But when they panned to the audience and the people who are very much grappling with this, you know, you could see shock, confusion, stress, trauma, a deep emotion, deep pain. And so I think part of education is being prepared to attend to each other as we kind of move beyond erasing our histories to like figuring out what it is. You know, Angela Davis says, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Which means like this type of classroom is going to bring up emotions for everybody, regardless of where you are. And I think part of being an educator is being humble and being honest when you don't know what to do. Learning from other people outside of yourself in that classroom, and having this really deep humanizing classroom that Lupe is talking about, so that we can really manage and heal together, like figure out what's going on for each other. And so when I see the banning of books and the banning of curriculum and all of these types of things, it's not just politics, it's people avoiding deep pain. It's people avoiding deep truths. It's people avoiding deep histories. And we must confront each other deeply, I think, if we want to see ourselves out of kind of the where we are. But I guess I'll stop talking for a moment, and I have other thoughts later on.
And to one another and kind of confront each other in that pain so that we can imagine something else. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in your school? Because you said that you felt the need to get outside of the public school system and to really start something different. How is your school different? What do you do to really change the status quo in your classrooms?
Yeah, thanks. So we start our day off with mindfulness and sitting together as a whole school. We are a micro school, so there's always less than 30 of us. But I also think, you know, if there are 30 people in a classroom, this is really possible. And then we try and find rituals and practices that ground us in what we want to do and how we want to be together. And then most of our curriculum is really spent around themes and not so much a linear prodding along history to just know dates and numbers and things like that. But it's who are the human beings involved? It's things like, you know, it's not just the brutality and the violence, it's how did people resist? Black History Month just ended. We say we are Black history all day, every day. We are Indigenous history all day, every day. We are queer history all day, every day, because those are the histories, and not just the histories, it's the ways of being that have been neglected and that are not known. And so, you know, as an African person who's kind of leading the project that is Angelus Workshop School, that tells me that kind of the African cosmology and the non-Western ways of being that have supported my people, that have allowed us to be here, are important and might be important to how we can see our way out of the kind of ways that we're in. And so that will mean things like, you know, maybe we don't need hierarchies all day long. So we don't have homework at our school, for instance. You can choose to do things, you can choose to not do things. Somehow we agree and we have consensus and models of thinking about that and doing those things together. We think that the cognitive is as important as people's emotional life. So it's not just academics and the brain stuff, it's the heart stuff. It's it's the relational stuff, most importantly. So the one criteria for coming to our school is, do you want to be with other people? Do you want to learn with other people? That is the fundamental question. Do you want to be in full and whole relationship with your fellow human being and struggle towards whatever that means? And then, you know, things like time. We have a slow start. It might not seem like super revolutionary or whatever, but school starts at 9. Mosey on over at 9:15 if you're struggling. Come early if you have a project to do. You know, let's learn how to negotiate and be together in space outside of like artificial constructs of between 8 and 9 you have science, and then between 9 and 10. So that's another one too, is interdisciplinary practice and saying we can all be experts in things. We can all know things together. We can all humbly figure out things. So what I just mentioned is not just about racism, but I think a whole kind of pedagogy and way of understanding yourself as a learner, and as a practitioner in a learning space that might facilitate the kind of very difficult conversations that we need to have.
About relationship and the importance of building the relationship as a way to move through conversations that might be difficult, with the end goal of reconciling and also like living in community together and envisioning something that we don't have yet. Dr. Jackson, I'm going to move to you as a folklorist. Why are these stories important to include in the classroom? And then how do you recommend that we do that? I know you're at the university level, but you did a lot of work on the in communities as well.
Yeah. First, I like to just say these two sisters, I mean, today is what, Friday? And so, I mean, everything's ongoing process. I'm learning from them two this morning to reevaluate my pedagogy, right? Like, it's not a definitive answer for me. And I used to be a high school teacher before I came up here and everything. But yeah, I mean, how you gonna get somebody to perform and be proficient if you don't give them the skills to execute with basic stuff, right? I mean, I think, you know, I'm in Alabama. It's always anti-CRT here. I mean, that's just the way it is. I don't call it that. I don't talk about it in class. You know, it's like I said in the movie, it's like who gets to define the terms? You know, if I'm teaching Homer, if I'm teaching W.E.B. Du Bois, you know, let's define what these writers wrote, or these oral poets wrote. And I don't really separate, Rebecca, the oral from the written. You know, it's like they were talking about like Afrocentricity. That's what it reminded me, these discussions. We keep rolling out new ways of describing the same thing. I was looking at Ms. Cardona's website. She had Pablo Freire, she had Richard Wright in a picture on there. It's the same. We just keep redefining it. Every time we get contested, we move on to the next definition, right? Like we're perpetually in the fight. Now, I think what Dr. Ndindi was saying was like the trauma in the what are we calling it around here? Like we got a lot of folks who have like post-traumatic slave syndrome, or, you know. And so, you know, today is Tuesday and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get my freshmen, right, to read Edgar Allan Poe's short fiction. And I can only do it by talking about, you know, 19th century context of Baltimore, Maryland with Black people, right? So that's my entree. So I, you know, I think, you know, all pedagogy comes from your values, you know, and if you teach values or you teach people to articulate their own values, I'll give you an example. So like I said, we're going to do Edgar Allan Poe here in Mobile, right? So we have these like these historic homes, these antebellum homes that are really pretty and help give the cityscape a lot of flavor. And you know, we're going to go up in them homes and take a tour. And we're going to look at, you know, we're going to talk about what Edgar Allan Poe was talking about, but we're going to look at Italianate architecture. That interdisciplinary thing is the key. And that getting out of the classroom, you know, I still got kids in the house. Them boys can't sit still. You know, they can't sit still and they hungry all the time. And I think my freshmen are the very same way. I can't just keep them up in the classroom. If we're in the state of Alabama, we got to go to Selma, baby. We got to go to Montgomery. We got to go to wherever, whoever is doing interesting, proficient, and compelling stuff, we got to go. Because sitting up in Mobile, Alabama ain't the end all be all. It's nice. But since if you in a classroom, you already at a point of luxury. You ain't at a job grinding, you know. So if you're gonna be in school, you know, I just think it's just old school experientials and proximity stuff. We're in the bedrock of contemporary civil rights, so we're gonna use that as our artifact. That's all I got to say about all that.
You got to articulate your own values and work within the context of where you are too. And so many times, especially with the new laws, we're almost self-censoring as teachers and limiting our own context. So as we're trying to silence other stories because we feel the need to, we're silencing our own. And I think that's important to remember too. Next, we're going to go to 3 students who are here from Lauren McCoy's class at the Manhattan Arts and Language Academy. If you guys would introduce yourselves and then tell us a little bit about how you're working within your class to talk about race and some of the new oppressive laws.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm a senior at Manhattan Academy for Arts and Language. I'm going to start by sharing some of my thoughts and the ideas that my classmates in AP gave about why we think we should talk about race in school. So, talking about race and equity in the classroom helps students develop their identities, social skills, and truth. It teaches students about the history and the state of society now, while also assisting them in maintaining a sense of community. We must be able to talk about race because it is very present and because racism has a significant influence on all of us. We should also talk about race and racism in school because it is important for us to know about racist experience and struggles of people of color. We need to know the history and accomplishments and joy of communities of color too. We need to be capable of using our freedom of speech. It's not wrong for us to express our thoughts. Being able to discuss and learn about race, in my opinion, as a student, is significant because we aim to make a difference. We can create posters, use our voice, and speak out when we notice anything that is wrong or unfair.
Hi, my name is Sebastian, and I'm going to talk about some of what we were doing at our schools to talk about race. So hopefully this can inspire some teachers on how their students can work with this. So as mentioned, we were members of the equity team in our schools, and which the students from team where we discuss a variety of issues in school and in real world. And we especially look at racial equity. We try to make a difference with the power of our voices. For example, with these surveys on our students using Google Forms to see how their experience in school, if they feel challenged in their classes, if they feel welcome, and other things about them in school. Uh, with the street data that we collect, we talk about with the students individually about their experience and collect anecdotal evidence. We found that many students said that they didn't feel challenged in their classes. And
So we went to classes and observed and looking for evidence of students being challenged. Are they being pushed to think more deeply and use critical thinking? We gave feedback to the teachers and we worked with them to think about challenging students and having equity in their classrooms.
also we went and found out about the book banning going on in Florida and other states, about the AP Black Studies curriculum being cut, and the College Board decision to take out Black LGBTQ figures from AP Black Studies curriculum. We were very upset about that topic, and College Board says that it wants to increase equity, but that can happen if they are not okay with erasing history. So in our AP class, we did gallery walk presentations where we studied and present about important Black LGBTQ people. We learned about Marsha P. Johnson, Bayard Rosin, James Baldwin, and Bell Hooks, to name a few.
In the past, we have made posters about gun violence, women's rights, and Black Lives Matter, topics that we have seen throughout our days in school. We put them around the school for people to see and start conversations. Our next steps are to ensure that equity in school continues to expand, that more people listen, and that people are not afraid to speak up and make a difference. We also want to make everybody feel comfortable, welcome, and a member of our community.
To continue, my name is Julio. After watching the documentary, I was thinking about how people deserve to know where they come from and what happened when people's history get erased. In the documentary, it said, if you are disconnected from your ancestor, you are going to be wandering through the world lost. So be connected to your ancestor past, keep you connected, use erasing someone's history. That include the struggle and the success. Racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia is happening. We can pretend it's not. In the documentary, one of the descendants say, yes, this actually happened and we are validated. We are a school of immigrants. We know that it's like when people on the train look at us or treat us different to our friend or family, we see it happening. We know that no one is free until we are free. Also in the documentary say, I don't want to be part of it. I want to be it. Couldn't certain that's even more harmful. Couldn't people of history is erasing their humanity, even worse. Like they say in the documentary, also there's a crime against humanity. We have some questions for everyone to think about. There may not be a simple answer. So do you think a school have a responsibility to teach a student about the experience of historical marginalized group? Or how do you think discussion about race can inspire students to become agents of change in their communities? And what are some practical steps school can take to promote social justice and inequality for our students? Also, do you have any question for us?
Thank you for listening, and that's it.
It's so inspiring that you guys formed a committee to go and look
know,
at
right?
classes. That's incredible.
Yeah, I gotta say, you guys, I mean, I don't need to be pejorative now. I'm very sort of proud of y'all because I ain't never been on a Zoom with a bunch of kids who come at me like this. So I just want to acknowledge that. And if I may, the rest of y'all, I cuss in my classroom. Okay, so
It's okay.
the answer to your first question is hell yeah. Schools have a responsibility to teach about historical marginalized groups. But I like to flip that question a little bit and say, I'm not really interested. I don't want to really use the word marginalized when talking about myself, right? I want to sort of place myself at the center and have some grace and humbleness about it and all, but I ain't marginalized, right? I'm teaching my students to go get it. All right. They always tell me, well, Dr. Jackson, I'm a soldier. I'll say, good. Well, you better arm yourself with some reading, right? And some literacy. So I think absolutely the schools have a responsibility.
Okay.
Panelists now, if you want to jump in and ask questions or say anything else, if listening to each other pulled up some other ideas, feel free to chime in. I just want to say to you guys though, as students, what a fascinating idea to have a student panel looking at equity in the classroom and trying to find places where you can be challenged and students can be challenged and seeing critical thinking as a pathway to equity. I think that's an incredible thing for all of us as educators to be thinking about. And I'm going to pose one more question to you guys, and feel free to just chime in now as you want to. What would you tell teachers who, especially in areas like Mobile or in East Tennessee or in rural Oklahoma, why is it important to move through this discomfort and teach this anyway? Why should we not just teach what is safe? What would you tell teachers on the front lines right now?
So I think teachers need to tell like the story that us as descendants need to know, because with our history, we don't have any like roots, we can say, that follow us, like ethnicity and things like that.
Mhm.
Want to say something else?
I just think that it shouldn't like be about the teacher. Like it always should focus on the student, because students should be able like to see themselves in what they're reading or what they're learning about. Like they should feel like they want to. And what about those students that are gonna feel like they don't, like they're not important?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it okay if I chime in? Yeah. So I just want to also echo, like, that's amazing. And I think my question would be, if we wanted assistance with implementing the type of survey that you all conducted, I think I would be really open for it. And I think it would be very powerful to see students, be a part of the change that we actually need to see in our schools. So would you be willing to advise us on that?
Share your tool. We want to know. We want you to share your tool.
Yes, we do.
When we came back, like when we had school online, it wasn't the same. Like kids weren't being motivated. So when we came back last year to the classroom, things weren't the same from when us since we're seniors, when we were freshmen. So when we came back, everything was like, adjust, like we had to adjust.
Yeah.
So by that, we saw that students were students, we wanted to know, like, were students being challenged in the class, like asking, like, let's say the teacher was showing something, did they have a question? Did they have something else they wanted to think about, or like follow-up questions to make them see if they're understanding?
Yeah.
And when we started, like when we came up with the idea, we had a group of, I'll say like 6 students come in, and we asked them, we created questions and we asked them how do they feel like in the school, like being back from being remote, how they felt being in the classroom and interacting with others and etc. As well, when we then from that information, we created the questions on when we went to go observe the classrooms and what the teachers were doing, to see if was it the teachers, was it the students were, and we realized when we went into the classrooms that students were divided. Like we had students that were like shy, then we had students that were talkative students, and then we had students that weren't really like into the lesson. So that's when we realized, like, creating the survey and doing the observation of what we could do as the equity team to do to make a difference about it.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to answer one of your questions about whether schools have the responsibility to teach about students. And so Ndindi and I actually have been a part of this, the ethnic studies movement here in California. And so now that we in California have successfully, after like 50 plus years, have, institutionalized ethnic studies in high schools, right? But then that comes with a new problem, right? And the new problem is that in ethnic studies, we've always talked about centering the voices of Native people and people of color, right? But what we see in California, it may not be like some of these crazy laws in Florida, but we see it nonetheless. And it's actually kind of scarier, right? In some ways, because it's kind of hidden, right? And what it is what they're doing here is they're trying to marginalize those voices again and calling it ethnic studies. And so that's something that we've been really fighting for. And so what we've been doing here is we're pushing for teachers to have, an actual degree in ethnic studies or, Black studies, Chicano Latino studies, one of the ethnic studies. And we're also fighting for there to either be a ethnic studies credential or like an added authorization, because right now in California, all you need is a social studies credential and you can teach ethnic studies. And we've studied all of the preparation that someone who, is credentialed in social studies needs to have. And it's very Euro-American, it's very European, or it's like concepts based. And it's almost zilcho, like there's almost nothing that is actually like, ethnic people, racialized ethnic groups from the United States. So those are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that people who are actually taking these roles are doing it in a way that doesn't further the shutting up of the voices of our ancestors. I always say my abuelita, right? My abuelita needs her voice, right? Because the reality is, and that's something that Descendant does a beautiful job of, right? In Africa Town, showing like the descendants really connecting to the ancestors, right? And I really love when they talk about like, they came with the ideas, the spirituality, the language, right? The languages. And here in LA, I'm sure it's very similar to where you all are at. you know, I have students that come speaking Spanish, Quiche, Zapoteco, Mixteco, like all sorts of languages, right? And because we're in the system that's very like Euro-American centric, it's like, hide that about yourself. That's the way it's been forever. So you've got these next generations, like my generations, right? That are, that keep that like quiet, right? We're like suppressing it. And now we're at a point where like, no, don't suppress that, embrace it, right? Which is beautiful because A, you love yourself, and B, it helps you to connect to those, well, really to everyone. I know, because if you love yourself, you have nothing but love to give in the world, right? That's number one. But also too, it doesn't, you know, further the trauma of people who are coming here, right? And you know, are fully themselves. And then we like treat them in a way that's like not humanizing, because we are so Americanized, and we've always used this like American ideal, right? To speak a certain way and dress a certain way and think a certain way as like what's good, right? And we're saying, no, like my abuelita is beautiful, you know, with her dress and her hierbas, right? And all the things that she knows, all her knowledge. And if you, like, I literally have students, like I have a student, Mario, who is been here for like a year from Guatemala. And because we've developed this relationship that's safe, he told me, he goes, soy curandero, like I'm a healer. This kid knows. He goes, there's certain people in our community who have, I can't remember the word that he used, but it was basically saying like, I have a knack for, you know, healing. And so I was chosen, and they've taught me, right? And here he is, he's just a kid lost here in the world, but because he has the safe space here, it's like, we can honor that. We can honor that, right? Because the reality is I'm sure all my kids, maybe they're not curanderos themselves, but they probably have an uncle or a grandma or somebody in their community that is. And so yeah, so those are some of the things that we're doing, and I absolutely say yes to that question. We do have a responsibility, but not all of us can do it. So let's leave it to those of us who that's our passion, right? It's our passion. So we do that work personally, and then we've done it also academically, right? And we've done it in our communities as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll chime in very quickly. I'm really here very much for what Dr. Jackson said and what Lupe said. I think the first thing is really just very much thanking you for the insights that Julio, Emily, and Sebastian have brought forward, because you know, sometimes I think we think about data in these very interesting and academic ways, but you've just reaffirmed a couple of things. For instance, in science education classes, the data has shown, and for so many years, a couple of decades, that actually Black, Native students and students of color get asked less critical questions. And so do women and femmes. Meaning, like, you know, if you're in a science class, I'm a science teacher, that's why I'm bringing it up, might be like, what is this? But then when the question is, how do you think about this? How do we solve this? You know, what are your thoughts around this? The critical thoughts or the extensions of how you understand knowledge, those, and again, like stubbornly so from the 70s, the data do show us that actually is very much a pitfall. There's this expectation that the folks of color and the women and the femmes and the gender nonconforming folks don't really get these questions, and the fact that you're able to tap into that and figure that out and ask good questions, and also just at the end of the day, not just say, hey, we just need more heroes and holidays. You're saying we need more critical thought. That's a beautiful thing to me personally. That really hit my heart that you tapped into that and that you've done that work, and I'm very much hoping that you'll allow us on the Liberated Ethnic Studies front for us to collaborate and to share if that's important to you. That's super. I think that's awesome. Schools have a responsibility, yes, as institutions of learning, and also as if you go to a public school and there's a sense of we want to do something for our communities, yes, I think the answer is yes all around, and this is why we're here. I think a little bit for some of us who we're facing our own challenges, like in California, that don't look the same as everyone else. So I don't want to not understand your context, because I think context is really important. And I think we need to develop solidarity, like really understand each other better. You know, that documentary really let me understand, and I'm somebody who's been teaching and thinking about Black studies for about 20 years. I don't know as much about Mobile, Alabama as I would like to. What would solidarity from somebody like me who lives in California doing what I do look like? What would it mean to support the work of Dr. Jackson and his students and the residents in that community there? I think we gotta keep it tight. If we're out here just struggling in isolation, you know, just everyone's fighting for the little bit of thing that they can acquire, I'm not sure that will get us where it's at. So I think this question of solidarity might be important for us to think about. And not just solidarity as adults, and this is why I'm so thankful that the youth are here. You know, the question I would have for the young people here is, what does solidarity look like to you? Because I think there's a system of domination we don't always name in here, which is adultism, and the oppression of youth and the suppression of youth voices. And as teenagers, you're here as an equal who have things to offer. And I don't think that we always necessarily make that a possibility. And I don't want to put that responsibility on you, but if, you know, if there are ways in which we can make that better, if you want to think about that with us, I'd be curious to think about what that means, right? Because you're the ones who are in these institutions who are facing kind of these problems. Sure, the book is banned and the teacher feels terrible, but then it's a curriculum you've been denied, and it is your community as well who's part of this. So it's not just about teachers, and I love that Emily pointed that out. The focus is students. It should be a student-centered, human-centered thing that we're thinking about, and not just the discomfort of teachers and admin and what have you. And then I think I'll kind of end on this kind of note of, just in case I don't get a chance to talk again, is, you know, as much as race is not a biological construct, it's a social construct. That doesn't mean it's not real. Clearly, the social construct means real things in people's lives, right? There's economic, environmental, social, all sorts of repercussions of this thing we're calling race. But it's also can be more of a flimsy concept. I mean, they wouldn't be trying to ban us, reject us, push, if we weren't making strides, or if it didn't make a difference that we were talking about this, right? They wouldn't be trying to shut us down. So clearly we can chip away at this thing, and clearly as a social construct, we can have something different. And I think there's that hopefulness in there. And I think I'm so excited to be here in this conversation. I think a lot about Mariam Kaba, who says, don't let this like lead you into desperation, let it radicalize you or politicize you or make you think about an alternative. So when we're confronted with these difficulties, I feel as if they should bring us together, not flatten our differences, which oftentimes are real, but really bring us together in a kind of way where I can fully understand your struggle, even if it is not mine intimately, and you can understand mine, and that we can like find our way out of it. So yeah, I guess that would be my question to the young people who spoke, is if you have thoughts around how we can be more supportive.
solidarity, community, coming together, helping our brothers or and sisters, or Action National honor also Action National honors clothing drive for new immigrant students, starting conversation in school, and the games and those two.
As we're also part of National Honor Society, we as National Honor Society try to make our school like come together. So for example, as Julio said, the clothing drive, we had new students come in from Venezuela, and they came, you know, with not much. So what we did as National Honor Society, we brought in clothing from home that we wouldn't use no more, and we set up like a little thrift shop here at our school to make them feel welcome and try to help them out, as well as we had a bake sale to raise money for the seniors. So we're always trying to like help each other in our school. So I think that's why our school is really like together. Like our community here is always doing something for each other.
Also in our community, there's a lot of groups like that form after school. Like there's an art group, also there's a music group, dance group, and other things that keep us together, even though in actual classes.
As well as coming up that we have coming in May, we're doing it's like a dance, well,
Culture.
a
cultural
cultural
dance.
dance. So like that, everyone could show off their culture, and you know they could dress the way they want and do by groups they're doing dances,
Traditional.
traditional
Share
dances.
their techniques.
I love
Much,
that's folklore and tradition in motion right there. That sounds really compelling to me.
and just for the sake of time, I'm going to wrap us up, but this has been excellent. I'm so excited that I had the opportunity to be here with all of you this morning and just learn from every one of you. And just to recap a little bit, what I heard each one of you say is that listening to stories, building those relationships in the classroom and outside of it, and asking ourselves questions about how can we really move forward in solidarity and hope, that is what leads us to action. It's what leads us to service. It's what connects us to community. And so speaking truth, really learning about all of the stories and all of the history and giving them a space within the classroom and outside of it is what's going to move us past this culture of fear that we're finding ourselves in right now. And so I just want to thank you all for the work that you're each doing and for agreeing to be here with us today. If you want to learn more about the Speak Truth to Power program or about human rights education, I encourage you to go to the RFK Human Rights website. Also, we have some excellent educational materials about the film Descendant. So please take time to screen Descendant at your school if you haven't had the opportunity to do so already, to engage with us and tell us how you're honoring stories within your classroom. We would love to hear from you. Thank you.